Hello, welcome to the Daily Politics. Jeremy Corbyn takes his campaign north of the border, but can he reverse Labour's fortunes in Scotland? Meanwhile, the Labour leader is criticised for appearing to question his party's policy on Trident. The Conservatives dub him a risk to national security. And the Conservatives, are they planning a tax bombshell in the next Parliament? The 2015 manifesto promised not to raise VAT, income tax or national insurance. But is that about to change? The polls might make it look clear, so why is everyone talking about tactical voting? And mon Dieu, it's Macron and Le Pen in the final round of the French presidential election, as voters say au revoir to the established party's candidates. All that in the next hour, and with us for the whole of the programme today, the Shadow Defence Secretary, Neil Griffith, and the former Conservative Minister, Alistair Burt. Welcome to both of you.
Thank you.
First of all today, Jeremy Corbyn is heading to Scotland to address the Scottish Trades Union Congress. He will reaffirm Labour's commitment to repeal what he calls the Vicious Trade Union Act and will say the party will never, ever apologise for its close ties to the unions. Let's talk to our correspondent James Shaw, who's in Aviemore. So we know what he's expected to say. Is it actually going to do anything to Labour's political fortunes in Scotland?
Well, that's the question, isn't it? And what I think I noticed from the bullet points we've heard about what Jeremy Corbyn is going to say is that there didn't seem to be anything that was differentiated specifically for Scotland. There were no policies that were tailored for Scotland. This is the message that we would expect Jeremy Corbyn and the Labour Party to put out across the UK. And you have to wonder whether that is the right strategy, because Scotland is a very different polity in a sense than the rest of the UK. Different things matter here. There are different political threats. And of course, the most obvious of those threats, as far as Labour is concerned, is Nicola Sturgeon's Scottish National Party.
What are the prospects, do you think? What are the voices saying in Labour north of the border?
Well, it has to be said, they do not look particularly good. We've only got to go back to 2015 and the fact that Labour lost all but one of their 41 MPs in Scotland, and things really haven't improved since then. They got worse during the Scottish elections last year, where Labour dipped below the Conservatives, so they're now currently, according to the polls, in third place. You would think there would have to be a really serious effort by Labour to make a distinctive and persuasive offer to voters in Scotland, really, for them to make any sort of improvement in the polls that they have at the moment. Although I suppose there are factors like Brexit, which might make some people lean back towards Labour, whereas they hadn't in the past.
As you say, that puts a slightly different dimension to this election in Scotland. And to steal a phrase from Ruth Davidson, the Tory leader in Scotland, has the country reached peak nat? In other words, it's only downwards for the SNP. Does that mean that both the Tories and Labour could pick up seats, and the Liberal Democrats?
Definitely Ruth Davidson will make that case through the course of this campaign. She's done it already, suggesting that the referendum in 2014, or perhaps the election in 2015, that was when sentiment in favour of independence was at its strongest. And she hopes that it is ebbing away. And there are one or two seats in Scotland where the Conservatives are second to the SNP. They will be fighting, you can be absolutely sure, very, very hard to try and get into first place, to try and claw back some MPs in Scotland, so that Ruth Davidson can make the case that peak nat has passed, and that therefore means that there is less of a case for an independence referendum, less of a case for Scottish independence, she would argue.
James Shaw in Aviemore, thank you very much. Now, the Defence Secretary, Sir Michael Fallon, says Jeremy Corbyn would put Britain's security at risk if he wins the general election and becomes Prime Minister. Mr Fallon, who has been in Bristol this morning at the headquarters of Airbus, attacked the Labour leader for calling into question Labour's commitment to the Trident nuclear weapons system and for suggesting he would be reluctant to authorise a drone strike on the leader of the Islamic State terror group.
Labour want to be the next government. Jeremy Corbyn is putting himself forward seriously as the next Prime Minister of this country, somebody who wouldn't authorise strikes against terrorists, who wouldn't support our nuclear deterrent, and who would undermine our defences. So it's very important. We do point out this is somebody who could be Prime Minister in 6 weeks' time.
Well, the Defence Secretary, Mr Fallon, was responding to Jeremy Corbyn's appearance on the Andrew Marr show yesterday, as well as being asked about how he would deal with Islamic State. The Labour leader was also asked if the party's manifesto would include a commitment to renew the Trident nuclear missile system. The Shadow Defence Secretary, our guest here today, Nia Griffith, had previously said the manifesto would include such a commitment. Here was Mr Corbyn's response.
We haven't completed work on the manifesto yet. As you'd expect, we're less than 100 hours into this election campaign, so let's...
She could be in for a shock.
No, we're having that discussion within the Labour Party, and we will produce our manifesto early in May.
Do you think killing the leader of ISIS
Listen,
would be helpful for a political solution?
I think the leader of ISIS not being around would be helpful. I'm no supporter or defender in any way whatsoever of ISIS, I'm sure you would concede, but I would also argue that the bombing campaign has killed a large number of civilians, who many of whom were virtually prisoners of ISIS. So you've got to think about these things.
Jeremy Corbyn there. Nia Griffith, there you are. We are none the wiser as to whether the renewal of Trident will be in the Labour Party manifesto. Will it or won't it?
It absolutely will be in the manifesto, because it's firmly our policy, and that's been reaffirmed time after time, that the Labour Party is fully committed to the nuclear deterrent, and conference after conference we have reaffirmed that policy, and I've made that very clear since I've been the Shadow Secretary of State for Defence.
Have you made it clear to Jeremy Corbyn?
Indeed I have, and as I say, it has been agreed that it is going to be in the manifesto.
So were you surprised that just yesterday he said and suggested that the Labour policy on this might not be in the manifesto? In fact, he said it hadn't been written.
Well, the point is, it is our policy, it's very firmly our policy, and it will be in the manifesto.
But the Labour Party leader doesn't agree with you that it isn't yet in the manifesto, so it throws doubt on it.
Well, I think the important thing is that we have reaffirmed very clearly that it is part of our policy. We are firmly committed to the nuclear deterrent.
So what was your reaction when you heard that yesterday?
Well, we all know that Jeremy has had his own personal view on a number of issues, but the really important point here is that this is something we've been committed to for a very long time. Back in 2007, we set the ball rolling for the renewal of the Trident submarines, and we're quite clear what our policy is.
You presumably have had these discussions, as you've said, with him, and he is still opposed to it. Is that sustainable during an election campaign, that his views are still at odds with what the Labour Party policy is on this crucial issue and will be during the campaign?
When people are voting, they're going to be voting for a political party, and I think it's very important that they know what our policy is. And our policy is very clear, that we are committed to the renewal of the nuclear deterrent.
Now, it wouldn't be the first time that Jeremy Corbyn has disagreed with something in his own manifesto, but it would be the first time a Labour leader did during an election.
Well, I think the important thing is that I'm setting out exactly what our policy is and telling you exactly where we stand on it for our manifesto.
And you say people are going to be voting for a party. Should they not be voting for Labour if they want to see Jeremy Corbyn as Prime Minister?
I think the important thing is that we are a team, we are a party, we are working as a party, and this is not a presidential election. This is an election about who is in government, and this is an election between political parties in this country.
How can it still be a deterrent if Jeremy Corbyn as Prime Minister has clearly said and restated he would never ever use it in any circumstance? It's no longer a deterrent, is it?
I think it's very important that we are absolutely clear that we are prepared to use it, and I'm certainly prepared to use it, but I also think it's very important that we're very clear that you also deal with countries and potential enemies by being clear from the outset that you are prepared to use force, that you have force to back up your negotiations. Nobody wants to use force as a first option. Everybody wants to negotiate first, wants to try to get peaceful settlements. But if you have the option of force, conventional forces obviously initially, but you have the ultimate deterrent as well, then you are far more likely to actually sustain peace and security at the end of the day.
You've said you would use it
Absolutely.
as a last resort, but Jeremy Corbyn has said he won't. And if you win the election, he will be Prime Minister. It won't be you pushing the button, it would be him, or in this case, he won't be pushing the button.
I think what he actually said yesterday was that he would not use first strike. What we have to be absolutely clear about is that we are prepared to use the nuclear deterrent, and we are prepared to use it, and I think that's what we want.
But how's it going to look to voters when you have a party leader who is sticking to his line that he's always had, and you have a completely different approach?
Well, as I've told you, it's party policy, and the overwhelming membership of our party actually fully support our party policy, and that's where we are.
But it doesn't really matter, does it, about party policy, if your leader won't actually enact and uphold that party policy?
Well, I think it's very important, as I say, that we set out exactly what our party policy is so that people do know.
But he wouldn't use it.
Well, I think, as I say, it's very important that people know that we are fully committed to the nuclear deterrent.
It doesn't really matter, does it, in this instance? We know what Jeremy Corbyn's views are. This is a matter of last resort. Nuclear weapons will probably never, ever be used.
You bet it matters. I think Naya has done a remarkable job, as she does all the time, honestly trying to put the point of view of where the party is. But it just doesn't stack up. You have circumstances where the Prime Minister is required to make decisions. The Prime Minister alone has to make decisions. You cannot go into an election and have a situation where the party policy is one thing, the Prime Minister's stated views or the would-be Prime Minister's stated views are another in circumstances such as this. The only deterrent a country has is that those who might oppose or threaten a country knows exactly where its leadership is in times of crisis. We do not know that. We cannot know that so long as Jeremy Corbyn leads the Labour Party and says what he says.
Yeah.
As I say, I think it's very important that people do understand where we stand on this and that we are quite clearly committed to the deterrent, and it's very important that we have that deterrent.
Are you reassured by Jeremy Corbyn, who would be head of this country's national security and defences if Labour wins the election?
As I've said, we are totally committed to the deterrent. It is our policy and it will be in our manifesto.
He also said there'd be an all-encompassing review of defence if he is elected Prime Minister, so presumably he would scrap the Trident renewal.
The important issue here is that we are committed to the nuclear deterrent. We will have a review of other spending commitments within the defence budget. We will need to look very carefully, as has every government that come in done before.
But he did have a cast-iron opportunity to say, as part of that review, the Trident programme would stay in place because it's already there. He specifically refused to say that.
But I'm telling you that that is exactly what we are saying, that the Trident programme will stay in place, and of course we will look at all the other spending commitments.
Some of the other things he said he wouldn't necessarily be prepared to use drones to strike on the head of ISIS, Alistair Burt, and he's been criticised for that too. Yeah. But you are an expert in the Middle East, you are a former Foreign Office minister, and you have to admit that when you look at the Middle East now, we've had coalition airstrikes, we've had drone attacks on Jihadi John. There hasn't been really a removal of the threat of ISIS, has there, or peace in Syria?
There has been significant depletion of the leadership of ISIS over a period of time.
But it's still there.
Leaders have been taken out, well, they replaced them, but leaders have been taken out, significant figures have been killed. And if someone poses a threat to the United Kingdom and you have an opportunity to remove that threat, then it's incumbent on a leader to do that if the circumstances are right. Of course, all the other things about trying to seek peaceful solutions go without being said. We know that. That is what the process of diplomacy does all the time. But there are occasions in a conflict situation where something arises where an immediate decision is needed and something that can actually affect what is happening on the battlefield and affect the safety of innocent people can be done, can be achieved, and that is why the policy of removing leaders of ISIS, Daesh and AQ in the Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula, that is why that policy has been followed. It's not a policy on its own, of course it goes with other things.
Let's move on. The Conservative Party chairman, Patrick McLaughlin, has appeared to contradict the Chancellor, Philip Hammond, over the party's promises on tax. Last week, the Chancellor said that commitments made in the 2015 manifesto had constrained his ability to manage the economy flexibly. Mr Hammond was referring to the so-called tax triple lock, in which the Conservatives promised not to make any rises to national insurance, VAT or income tax. Mr Hammond recently had to drop a planned rise in Class 4 national insurance contributions because it appeared to contradict the 2015 manifesto. Mr McLaughlin was asked about this by Andrew on the Sunday Politics yesterday.
Philip Hammond, the Chancellor, said this week that your election promise in 2015, it was in your manifesto, not to raise taxes, had tied his hands when it came to managing the economy. Do you agree with him?
No. The simple fact is that what we've got to do is we've got to do the best things for the economy, and we will be setting out in our manifesto in a few weeks' time what the policies will be for the next Parliament.
So can I just clarify, you don't agree with your Chancellor?
No, of course. What Philip was saying was some of the areas that he wants to address as Chancellor. What the party will do is in its manifesto it will set out all the issues which we're fighting on. And it will set out very clearly the choice that we have in this country, and that's the important thing.
Patrick McLaughlin there. Alistair Burt, should there be the triple tax lock in the Conservative manifesto?
Well, we'll see. We don't have a manifesto at the moment.
But what do you think? Should it be there?
I think there should be continuing protection for pensioners. Whether it should remain exactly the same as it has up to now in new circumstances, I don't think that's
But should it be
necessarily the
explicit
case.
in the way it was in the last manifesto that a Tory government will not put up income tax, VAT or national insurance contributions?
I think if you're looking for the next manifesto that we're going to produce to be exactly the same as the last one.
Just on that
I
issue, should that be there? Should that explicit commitment be in this manifesto?
I'm quite sure that what will be in the manifesto is protection for pensioners in the way in which a new government sees that likely. I don't know whether that triple lock is going to be
But
there.
I'm not asking you about pensioners specifically, I'm asking you about taxpayers.
Well, no, sorry, the triple lock was in relation to
Triple
the...
tax lock, we're talking about the commitment that the Conservatives made not to increase VAT, national insurance
I'd have
or income
flexibility.
tax.
I'd have flexibility.
Right. So you drop it?
Well, I'd have flexibility because I think that's what a Chancellor needs. But the circumstances of this manifesto are different from the 2015 one, and I don't make taxation policy. So I want to see a taxation policy that will be right for the country, and what the government will propose, what the Chancellor will propose, will set it out in the context of where the economy is going.
Right.
And if it's a contest with anyone else in terms of low tax, this is a lower tax party.
Well,
the average
we'll come to the
basic
record
rate
on
payer,
low...
the average basic rate
Well, except Philip Hammond
pays
tried to put up
1,000
national insurance contributions, which was in direct contravention of the last commitment.
The average basic rate taxpayer pays £1,000 less than when we came into office. 31 million people have seen a reduction in their tax, 4 million people taken out altogether. I think in terms of tax policy, we're absolutely in the right place. But if it's going to vary from what it was in the past, I think that's fine.
All right, well, that's clear. You've made it clear you want flexibility.
Yes,
you
I
agree
do.
with Philip Hammond. So you don't want to see that triple tax lock, different to the triple lock for pensioners.
indeed.
But the triple tax lock you would like to see drop because it would give your party flexibility to put up taxes.
Flexibility in an economy which will still be a lower tax economy under the Conservative
But it will
Party.
give you flexibility to put them up.
It will give us flexibility in all the senses that you need for an economy which is growing, where growth sort of feeds into revenues and all that. But you can't say at this stage, I don't think, that everything we had in the previous manifesto must automatically
Oh no,
be
but I'm not saying it
replicated
should.
in the
I'm
next
not
one.
saying it should be. I'm asking
I want
you
the right tax policy for the
about
economy.
what's the most effective policy as far as you are concerned in the Conservative Party. You think the triple tax lock was a mistake?
No, I don't think it was a mistake. It was right for the time. It was right for that manifesto, and it's been followed through. But a new manifesto, a new situation with an election, gives a chance for the party to say something different.
Could
And I
you
think
rule
that makes
out,
perfect
I know it's
sense.
not your job, but do you think you could comfortably rule out there being any increases in VAT, income tax
Of course
or
I
national
can't.
insurance? Right,
Of
and
course
that
I
means...
can't.
So
I'm
you
a
can't then
backbencher
claim you're the
Republican.
lower... But you can't claim that you could be the lower tax party because
Well-
you could put up taxes.
Well, I reckon if you were to try and assess who might be the lower tax party, you might look at the record. And if you look at the record, are we not a lower tax party than our rivals and those who would seek to take power?
When did the Conservatives last put up VAT?
When did we last put up VAT? Oh, I can't remember.
Well, it was in 2011, and you said you wouldn't do it. You said there wouldn't be an increase in VAT, and it went up to 20%.
Is the average tax rate for those on basic rate income tax lower now than it was in 2010 or higher?
Right, well,
it's lower. You know it's
but
lower.
we're talking about all taxpayers, and if you promise not to put taxes up, that was the point of the triple tax lock, of course, was to promise that you wouldn't actually put up those income taxes.
But tax policy has got to take account of what's happening in the economy as a whole. A Chancellor, any government has got to have the opportunity both to raise and lower elements of taxation, whether it's direct or indirect, in order to produce the growth.
So it was a
and what
mistake,
is
that last
right
commitment, wasn't it, the triple tax lock? As you say, the Chancellor always needs to have flexibility, and that constrained him.
Well, that was the policy. It worked for the time. I think that was important. But of course, you want to see a government that has the ability to change. This persistence, I understand why it is.
Well, it's about trust, isn't
You've got
it?
to have some certainty, you've got to have trust. I agree with that. But if circumstances change and people need to make changes, then it's explained and then you're able to move forward. If everything is always pinned down, well, this was in the manifesto, it must never ever change for the future. We have a new manifesto. We can be judged on that. But I think we can also be judged on overall tax policy over the past few years, which is indisputably lower tax than it was.
All right, let's leave it there for the moment. Now, tactical voting along Brexit lines is the talk of the town here in Westminster this afternoon, I think. This is what's been said so far. The UKIP leader, Paul Nuttall, suggested yesterday that his party may not stand against some MPs who are good Brexiteers. He gave as examples the Conservative MP, David Nuttall, and Labour's Kate Hoey. And this morning, the UKIP branch in Bournemouth West have said that they will not stand against the sitting Conservative MP, Conor Burns. They said that because Mr Burns is pro-Brexit, it doesn't make sense to stand against him. Meanwhile, the Liberal Democrat leader Tim Farron said yesterday that there are no circumstances whatsoever in which his party would enter a coalition with either Labour or the Conservatives. But senior Lib Dem Vince Cable has called the only Green MP, Caroline Lucas, a good progressive. And he urged Liberal Democrats in Brighton Pavilion to back her. The Green Party supports a so-called progressive alliance, and they've said that they won't stand against the Remain supporting Labour MP Rupa Hook in Ealing, Central and Acton. And the former Labour Prime Minister Tony Blair has said that Brexit is a bigger issue than party allegiance in this election. Joining me now is Matthew Goodwin, Professor of Politics at the University of Kent. Welcome to the Daily Politics. Is it going to be a significant issue, tactical voting?
It could be. If you look at that UKIP promise to stand down against good Brexiteers, that could have real consequences. Let's say, for argument's sake, Theresa May were to win back half of the UKIP vote. That would bring about 40 to 50 Labour seats into play. On the other hand, if you look at the Lib Dems, they're really gambling on those Leave voters not turning out in a big way to allow them to try and tactically take advantage of Remainers.
You talked about it being significant in the case of UKIP not standing against good Brexiteers. I mean, some people might say that UKIP is all about Brexit. It was all about the whole EU issue. So why withdraw from a seat just because the sitting MP is pro-Brexit if they've got a whole other manifesto going?
Well, I suppose what they're returning to is the 2010 pact that Lord Pearson essentially made with the Conservatives, which was driven by the goal of ensuring the House of Commons is packed with as many Eurosceptics as possible. And what I think UKIP are worrying about is if they took 15% of the vote in City of Chester, for argument's sake, they could keep Labour in that seat, right? And they could keep a pro-Remain MP in that seat.
But I thought they were supposed to be about more than just Brexit, according to them.
Well, I guess they are. I mean, I guess they've been trying to get some traction with this anti-Islam issue over the last couple of days. They've been trying to talk about things like electoral reform and so on. I think in reality, though, most UKIPers would concede that their share of the national vote will probably go down to 6%, 7%, something like that. Now, for Theresa May, that has massive consequences. For the Labour Party, right, this is the interesting point for me. The last 3 years, the Labour Party has been panicking about the rise of UKIP. I think the Labour Party is going to start worrying about the collapse of UKIP because those votes going back to the Conservatives are going to have all kinds of repercussions.
What about the Progressive Alliance, if we look between the Greens, the Liberal Democrats and Labour? Is that only going to function at a sort of local level where individual agreements are made?
I imagine so. I'm not entirely convinced it's going to function at all. We're not seeing the kind of unity, the cohesion that you would need for that kind of pact to take place with less than 50 days to go until the election. This is an incredibly complicated state of affairs. But also, just take the Liberal Democrats as an example. The Liberal Democrats are hoping they can give the Conservatives a bloody nose in the southwest of England as an example. But look at some of those seats. Some of those seats have a majority Leave vote. So how are the Lib Dems going to get traction in seats where voters are going to say, do I vote tactically for the Lib Dems, or do I vote for what I really want and what I voted for at the referendum, which is Brexit? So I'm not entirely convinced, Joe, that this election is going to be this sort of mega big realignment election yet. I think the evidence is a little bit mixed. I think we're going to be finding ourselves on June 8th going from one region to the next, thinking, well, how is this playing out? Is UKIP hitting the Conservatives in more northern seats where voters still view the Conservative Party as toxic? But will they hit the Labour Party in more southern seats where voters are just shifting from UKIP to the Conservatives?
Are these suggestions of tactical voting really from a position of weakness and desperation? Or, in the age of social media, could there be quite an impact? Not just the UKIP-Tory sort of split, but across the left as well?
My own view is that tactical voting is always this big, exciting debate that we get into ahead of an election, but it never really materialises on election day. A little bit like 18 to 24-year-olds turning out to vote to change the course of history. It never really happens, does it? So I think we'll sort of come back and have this discussion after the election and find that actually there was very minimal signs of tactical voting generally. We will see a shift from UKIP to the Conservatives. I don't think that's so much tactical. I would say that's more expressive. That's traditional social conservatives coming home, if you like. I don't think that's actually tactical in that sense. Labour Party may find itself on a really bad day getting hit on multiple fronts. that desertion back to Theresa May, perhaps in some seats a drift over to the Lib Dems, but perhaps also another tactical decision. I'm going to stay at home.
Yes. We'll be talking a lot more about that over the coming weeks. Matthew Goodwin, thank you for coming in. Nia Griffith, what did you make of Tony Blair yesterday saying that actually the issue of Brexit is more important for voters than party allegiance?
I think this election's about many, many things, and certainly the economy is going to figure very, very strongly. I think taxation policy is going to figure very, very, very strongly, and we're very, very clear we're not going to hit low and middle income earners. I think it will be the everyday things as much as anything else. I don't think that Brexit will be the only topic by any manner of means.
But, of course, tactical voting could help you. The Greens, as we said, have already announced they're not going to stand against the Labour MP. They're the candidate who'll be Rupert Hook in Ealing Central and Acton. You must welcome that.
Well, I think it's very important that people recognise it's only the Labour Party that can actually make an alternative government to the Conservative government. And if people want to vote for a progressive party, then they need to vote Labour, because that's the only way that we can deliver change, and change is what people want in this country.
But what about in seats where it could help if you stepped aside and perhaps the Greens and allowed a Liberal Democrat to come forward? It would still not be a Tory candidate winning in seats. You wouldn't be in favour of that, even if it was agreed at a local level?
I think it's very important that people have the choice to vote Labour. It's very important that we represent the whole country. We have an opportunity to stand every single constituency, and we shall be doing so.
But one of the Greens' key target seats is Bristol West, where the sitting Labour MP, Thangham Debonair, is strongly pro-Remain. So do you think in that particular setup you would back some sort of pact?
I think it's very important that people vote for Thangham, and they're voting for Labour, and they're voting for a Labour government, because at the end of the day, what good would a Green MP do there? A Green MP hasn't got enough MPs to make a mini party in Westminster. It's really important people understand that Westminster has 650 MPs, and you can only have a significant impact in Westminster, and you can only form another government if you have a large political party.
Right, but you could have more seats if you did deals with the Liberal Democrats and with the Green Party and keep Theresa May out of Downing Street.
I think it's very important at the moment. We are going into an election. We are determined to win that election. We're determined to win it as Labour.
What do you make of the tactical voting that is being talked about so much at the moment?
I tend to be with Matthew. I think it's talked about an awful lot because it's interesting stuff and it's part of the democratic process. But when push comes to shove, I think people firstly tend to vote in our system, knowing that only a vote for their candidate is the most likely thing to get them elected. We've got a very straightforward system. The more votes your candidate gets, the more likely they are to win. I think some pacts beforehand, again, people talk about them, but the major parties have a vested interest in saying very clearly, vote for us. I mean, I agree with Nia when she says, people have got to realise the only alternative government is a Labour one. Absolutely right. That's why they need to vote tactically, vote Conservative to make sure that doesn't happen. So we're very clear on what people should be doing. They should be voting for us if they want strong, stable leadership. And that's what we offer.
Yeah, but obviously you're going to welcome UKIP's call today to say you shouldn't stand against good Brexiteers, like Conor Burns, for example.
I welcome anything that helps a Conservative be elected.
Right.
And Conor is a great colleague. And we are all very fixed now on, now that the referendum is out of the way, we're working to make this a success. So whether you voted Remain, like I did, or whether you voted out, like Conor, that now doesn't matter. What we've now got to do is commit ourselves, as the Prime Minister has set out, to making sure this leaving the EU is in the best interests of all of us. And that's where the Conservative Party is. And I think some people find it difficult, really, to get their heads around that.
But how difficult is that going to be for Remain Labour MPs who are in areas where there was a high turnout for Leave?
I think it's very, very clear what our party policy is, that we voted for Article 50 because we respect the view of the democratic vote in the referendum last year for Brexit, but that we want to get the very best deal that we can to ensure that we can protect jobs. So we want to have a good rapport with our European neighbours so that we can export our goods, so that we can keep our factories here, and we can make sure that we protect jobs.
Now, a UKIP government would explicitly ban Sharia law in Britain. The party has been giving more detail of its integration agenda this morning, after the leader, Paul Nuttall, revealed yesterday that a pledge to ban the burqa would also be in the party's manifesto. Here's the UKIP deputy leader, Peter Whittle, outlining the party's stance on Sharia courts.
No parallel system should ever be allowed to impinge on the integrity of British law. There must be no tolerance of systems which deny the equal rights of men and women. The rights of women, for these are the most affected by such practices, should and must extend to all parts of our society, regardless of religion or ethnicity. Now, the public are rightly alarmed at the growth in Sharia courts and the apparent unwillingness of the political class to face up to this.
That was Peter Whittle. I'm joined now by Margot Parker, UKIP's equality spokesperson. Thank you for coming onto the programme. Banning Sharia law and Sharia courts, they don't have any standing, of course, under the British legal system. So how are you going to ban them? Are you literally going to go round and stop them taking place?
Well, actually, when we sit down and put this completely together, which will be part of our manifesto, this is really about not allowing women to be second-class citizens so that they are well represented fairly. And only one law of the land, absolutely is supreme.
Right, but it is supreme, isn't it? I mean,
it needs to be clarified. It really does. I mean, women that are, for example, not perhaps allowed to perhaps have a share of a home or all sorts of things because they are disadvantaged. So we must explore this. It's got to be done.
Right. So how would you actually do it? How would you stop
you'll
these
see
Sharia
that.
courts
You
sitting?
will see that in our manifesto when we complete it. Today was just a press conference with some small sound bites to tell us what we're going to do, to tell you this is why we want more integration. We don't want women to be second-class citizens, and we feel very much that is the case.
But all women in this country are under a legal system that we all share. Whether or not there is a parallel court system that deals with some of the domestic issues like divorce, if they are to be passed and actually underlined in public in Britain, it has to go through our legal system. So I'm not sure what's going to change.
It most certainly does, but many women are disadvantaged by these Sharia courts, and we have a lot of evidence for that. So we must tackle the inconvenient problems that have been allowed to grow, and we must make sure that women are not subjected to being second-class citizens.
No.
We must deal with it.
Right. Paul Nuttall has called the burqa a barrier to integration. But wouldn't the proposed ban be a barrier to a cultural and religious expression in a multicultural society?
No, I mean, you don't have people covering their face working for you in the BBC. So, I mean, I think it's quite threatening to see people completely covering their face.
So you are against religious freedom and cultural expression?
No, not at all.
But that is what it is.
No, it isn't. I mean, in 1979, I think when the Islamic Revolution took place in Iran, women didn't and were not subjected to covering their face. They have a revolution, and then all of a sudden women can't be High Court judges, women have to cover their face.
But
Why?
in Britain, when women choose to wear the hijab, then that's their choice.
Well, yes, but just let me remind you a little bit about the what happened in 7/7. A man dressed as a woman and covered his face after 7/7 and got all the way to Rome.
So it's a security issue?
There is a security issue. There are lots of issues.
It's not a barrier to integration?
No, I think it is a barrier to integration.
Right. Why is it a security issue? You raised that issue particularly, but if it's about people's faces being covered on CCTV footage, for example, what will you do about people wearing balaclavas or helmets or masks?
Well, they can't, of course, in banks. You know, you don't do that. But already...
But you're saying it's a thing about security on CCTV.
The face covering is banned in France already. It's going to be banned in Germany. It's pending regulation in Austria.
Does that make it right?
I think it does. I think we're ahead of the curve here. We're standing up for women. We're saying, you don't need to do this. If this is oppressive to you, you don't have to do it because some men have told you
but
this is what you must do.
You're not saying you don't have to do it. You're wanting to ban it.
Yes, we are. Yes, we are. We want to give women that right.
You will be telling women what to do.
No, I'm not telling them what to do. I'm saying here is religious freedom for you. You don't have to cover your face because some mullahs or some men within religious orders have told you this is what you have to do.
All right, so you want to ban Sharia courts and Sharia law, and you want to ban women wearing the veil. In which way is it not anti-Muslim?
Well, it's not a question of being anti-Muslim. Let's take
these
the religion.
are only directed at Muslims.
Well, yes, because that's the problem area, is it not?
Right. You could also ban the courts that the ultra-Orthodox run, the Beth Din, but it's also a parallel legal system. But you haven't called for that, and you haven't called for any other expressions that people might use in terms of their religion. You haven't called for them to be banned, the cross.
What we've called for today is integration, not segregation. And I'm afraid that there are communities around the country where women are very much segregated. They don't actually integrate in society. Perhaps they're not even allowed to necessarily speak the language. I mean, we have all sorts of instances where women are definitely held back. And we want to stop that. We want them to realise their full potential.
Well, let me ask my other guests. Alistair Burke, would you support banning the burqa?
No.
Why?
In a free society, you don't tell people what to wear. If there are security issues, you deal with them quite separately. There are places where it's now part of the procedure where a woman would not be able to be fully covered in the court court, for example, in other security situations. But you cannot get integration if you decide to go and tell people what to wear.
Right. Nia?
I very much agree with Alistair, and I think it's very important that rather than imposing and dictating and telling communities exactly what UKIP thinks they should do, and we're very proud that we have strong Muslim MPs, and they're working with the communities.
Yeah, no, this is very much on the side of women. It is women that are forced, perhaps, maybe they have to have their votes done for them. In many areas, you've seen this throughout the country where there have been pockets where they've actually not been allowed to integrate. That's got to stop. We've got FGM, which is an abominable situation for any woman or young child to go through. This has got to stop.
That is quite right.
And there have been no prosecutions.
And the law is very clear on making sure...
But why haven't we prosecuted anybody?
It's certainly, the law has to be followed through. In FGM, you're absolutely right. I mean, that's outrageous. But the law is there to protect all of us, and that's the point.
But why is it not being followed through? Why have we had no prosecutions? They do in France.
Well, on the issue of FGM, as I understand it, you are proposing that parents of girls who are forced to have that procedure are also prosecuted. But that is already the law. It was extended by David Cameron in 2014. And, in fact, I think the law was extended in 2015. He called for it in 2014. So what are you proposing?
Well, we're proposing you actually beef it up and make sure you do have prosecutions. It can't carry on like this. I mean, it's a shocking thing today where young women are mutilated, brutalised.
And people would agree with you, but how would you go about getting prosecutions?
Doctors that really have to make sure, and health visitors, they've got to have these examinations. Yes, but there are no prosecutions, and you're not answering why we have.
But are you saying there are no
because
prosecutions?
the evidence hasn't been brought to court?
Well, let me pose this one to you. A couple of weeks back, I think it was the West Midlands, there had been a series on television about FGM, and I think on Twitter, somebody from the West Midlands Police had said, we don't really like to interfere with the family system, even though we know this might have happened. That was outrageous. I wrote to the West Midlands Chief Constable. I got a fair letter back. But nevertheless, they must prosecute vigorously any of these actions.
You're suggesting something, it's sort of akin to where domestic violence used to be. It's a domestic, people said, unacceptable, and that is not the law, and that is followed through. It cannot be right, if the law is being broken, that any police force allows that to happen. I'm quite sure that's the response you would have got from the police.
Is it being followed through? Because when you look at the numbers are very high.
Yeah,
David Cameron quoted them something like 130,000+. It does seem fairly incredible that there haven't been prosecutions. So is enough effort being made to actually follow through?
Well, I sincerely hope so. I mean, it is an issue which has risen in public prominence. People weren't aware of it some little time ago. It's got to be out there. But the answer is to make sure people feel able to come forward and don't feel in some way they're being stigmatised for a faith or anything like that.
Can I just very
That's what makes it difficult to get the evidence, to get the prosecutions we would all want.
What about banning Sharia law and Sharia court so there isn't a parallel legal system in this country? Would you support that?
Well, as you've explained, because there isn't a parallel legal system, it isn't a legal system, it's not recognised in our law. And I think the really important thing is that we work with our Muslim communities, and as I've said, we have some excellent women Muslim MPs in the Labour Party, and let's make sure that we are working together, and we're making sure that discrimination in all its forms is eliminated. It's absolutely vital that we do.
And women's rights must be indivisible in any part of the United Kingdom.
Absolutely. And on that note, thank you very much.
Thank you.
So, we might have our own election to occupy us, but until Theresa May made the surprise announcement last Tuesday, much of our attention was focused on events across the Channel. Last night, the 11 candidates in the French presidential election were whittled down to 2. The centrist Emmanuel Macron will face the leader of the Front National, Marine Le Pen, in the final round in a fortnight. Here they are after last night's result.
Aujourd'hui, dimanche 23 avril.
Today, Sunday the 23rd of April, the French people spoke. As the country is going through an unprecedented moment in its history, marked by terrorism, economic challenges, social suffering of workers, and urgent environmental problems. They have responded in the most beautiful way by voting in massive numbers.
En allant voter massivement.
We've made the first step which will take the French people to the Élysée Palace. This result is historic. It confers on me the immense responsibility of defending the French nation its unity, its security, its culture, its prosperity, and its independence.
With us now is Max Bégon-Lourd. I hope I pronounced that correctly. He works here in London and is a representative of the Front National in the UK. Surely it's over for her. François Fillon is endorsing Macron, as is the socialist candidate Benoît Hamon. And if enough of the voters who went for Mélenchon go for Macron, he's got it.
I think it's not that clear. I think we've seen French voters change their minds very quickly on the primary of the Republicans and the socialist primary. You've seen candidates that were nowhere that won the primary, so there's still 2 weeks to go. There's going to be a debate in about 1 week where Emmanuel Macron will have to explain his project for France in front of Marine. And French people will get a chance, finally, after 5 years of waiting, to decide if they want to go forward with unrestricted globalization or if they want to defend their identity.
Right. But I mean, you're a banker. I believe you work in the financial sector. And here, some people will say, how are you, who's obviously benefited from globalisation, supporting a woman who is protectionist and anti-globalisation?
Well, I had to leave my country to find a job somewhere else, so I don't see France having benefited that much from globalisation. I think overall some people have benefited and it's great for them, but it's a minority. There's been millions of industrial jobs destroyed in France. There's been thousands of women raped by immigrants. And this is a price French people are not ready to pay.
Right. So with Marine Le Pen as the president, you'll be able to go back to France and have a job similar to the one you have here?
I will be able to have a decent life in France, have an education that's paid for, have a health system that doesn't depend on how rich I am. Yeah.
Right. So you are in favour of her, what people might say, statist, protectionist views and policies?
I think in today's world, with all this competition from countries with lower social systems which don't respect the workers' rights as we do, it's essential we have a state to protect us.
I mean, one of the things that's been interesting is that the two candidates who've gone through to the final round, Marine Le Pen and Emmanuel Macron, have gone against the mainstream parties. They're painting themselves as the non-establishment candidates. But in a way, Emmanuel Macron has more to offer there. He doesn't even have a party behind him. Isn't he the populist who is going to ride that wave more than Marine Le Pen, who's become more established?
I think it's very interesting because I watched the speech of Emmanuel Macron that he said after results, and he painted himself as trying to change the system. I think if you just look at the facts, he's been a minister for 2 years, during which unemployment increased by 500,000. The fact that before that he was an advisor of President Hollande.
Sure.
So that his policies were directly inspired by him. I think portraying yourself as an anti-system candidate is very hard to
But you could argue that Marine Le Pen is very much part of the system, has been for years, as has her party. She has representation at sort of local town hall level, a couple of MPs. I think she's also very much part of the establishment.
Do you know any other candidate of the establishment who has had her house bombed when she was a child?
No, but I'm trying to sort of say that she is part of the political establishment in France. Do you not think she is?
She has always put the interest of the French people ahead of trying to gain a political position, and that's why I support her.
Right. Looking, I don't know if you managed to watch the coverage, some of the coverage last night. Were you surprised at how both François Fillon and the socialist candidates are out? The mainstream parties have been voted against.
Yes, they have. I mean, it's an extraordinary situation with the country is apparently as divided into four almost as we've seen from the result. It's certainly not from an outsider to pronounce in terms of individual parties, but that sense of uncertainty in France because of their process, the almost even split between four major blocs. But yes, the two main establishment parties have not gone forward, but one suspects now that the establishment parties, because of their interest in the issues that they consider important for France, may well come together and support Monsieur Macron.
It was a terrible, terrible showing for the Socialist Party in France. You must have felt pretty low watching that.
But I think the important thing is that we understand the French system. The French system is that they vote once and they can almost experiment, if you like, and see if their candidate actually can come anywhere. And I think that's what we've seen in yesterday's vote. We've seen
Benoît Hamon got 6%.
We've seen
the socialist
people,
candidate.
Well, we've seen people going, as I say, they've been looking elsewhere. They've been looking clearly for, obviously, Macron in this case. And I think what we will see now, I think we will see a coalescence of people coming together to back Macron, because I think he can appeal both to the more left-wing socialist side and also to the more perhaps business-minded right-wing side. And, I think he actually will go forward.
All right. Thank you very much for coming in, Max.
My pleasure.
So, let's see what else is happening in the week ahead. As we've already heard, both Jeremy Corbyn and Nicola Sturgeon are addressing the Scottish TUC conference today. Wednesday is a big day in the Prime Minister's diary, as it's the last PMQs before Parliament breaks up next week. She's also playing host to Jean-Claude Juncker in Downing Street and possibly EU's chief Brexit negotiator, Michel Barnier. Thursday is prorogation, or the formal end of the parliamentary session. It starts the period between the end of one session and the state opening at the beginning of the next, not to be confused with dissolving Parliament when an election is formally called, which will be next Wednesday. And the week rounds off with the European Council meeting on Saturday, where EU heads of government are set to agree on the negotiating terms of Brexit talks. Well, we're joined now by Fraser Nelson from The Spectator and Kate Proctor from The Evening Standard. Welcome to both of you. Fraser Nelson, first of all, we heard Tony Blair yesterday call for voters to put party allegiance aside and focus more on backing candidates who are anti a hard Brexit. Of course, we've got talks of Progressive Alliance. How much is tactical voting going to be present at this election, do you think?
In England, I don't think so much. Nobody really thinks that if you vote enough Remain MPs back to Parliament, Brexit will be stopped or overturned. In Scotland, there will be a lot of tactical voting, anti-nationalist voting, because there's another referendum on the cards there. Anybody who doesn't want it is likely to vote for the candidate most likely to stop the SNP taking the seat. So Scotland is where the tactical action, I think, will be.
Do you agree with that, Kate Proctor? I mean, do you think this is being done from a position of weakness rather than strength?
I think tactical voting, it comes up every time in an election, but I actually think there is something really serious behind this, and I particularly think that in England tactical voting is going to be the way forwards for lots of people. I've spoken to people over the weekend who are sort of making it their absolute agenda to choose a party that they would not normally choose.
Right. In terms of the issues that are going to be important, we obviously talked about tax and security, Fraser Nelson, but at the last week's PMQs, Jeremy Corbyn focused a lot of his questions on the debt and the deficit. Is the economy in that sense going to still play centre stage as it usually does?
Well, not to the same extent. The strange thing is that the Conservatives are moving to the left economically. Theresa May is stealing Ed Miliband's plans for an energy price cap, and she wants to clear the way for more tax rises, like she did in her last budget, but had to abandon because it wasn't in Cameron's manifesto. I think the Tory tax pledge not to raise taxes will vanish in this manifesto, and you're going to see the Tories move towards the Labour Party economically. I don't think there's going to be as big a battleground there. She'll be teased for stealing Ed Miliband's policies, but she might say, well, if you don't like that, who else are you going to vote for?
Right, but on energy, I mean, she will be teased for that, and so will Conservative ministers. I mean, Kate, in your mind, are they literally nicking some of the proposals from Labour to fix them, even though they said state intervention in the energy market would be a terrible thing?
Well, they seem to be doing that left, right and centre at the moment. It's all just about positioning at the moment, and I know that Theresa May is unlikely to think that Jeremy Corbyn's much of a threat, but if you do hark back to those policies of Ed Miliband, that's where the sort of Cameron Miliband sort of crossover existed previously, and I think Theresa May is going to be going after those policies to try and win back some of those voters, some of those 2015 Tories.
Right, well, one of the other policies that Labour is committed to is the triple lock on pensions, which some people might be surprised about, but we are talking about a group of people, pensioners, who do vote. And the Conservatives have yet to confirm that. Manifestos aren't out yet. What do you think, Fraser Nelson? Will it be in the manifesto?
I don't think it will. It's a very expensive pledge. It was only in there to bribe pensioners ahead of the last general election. I mean, it worked. The Conservatives got a majority. But now Theresa May doesn't need to bribe anybody with Labour as weak as it is. So expensive pledges like the treble lock and probably other promises to pensioners as well will vanish. She needs every penny she can get her hands on. And also, the pension pledge has done its job. There was a time when pensioner income was way below that of the working age. Now disposable income is almost the same for pension houses and working age houses. So it's time, I think, to abolish the pledge.
Yes, go on,
I was going to say raising the state pension age is something that's very much on the agenda, or it was until last week, and so it'll be interesting to see whether that comes up in the manifesto or whether that's going to be sort of kicked into the long grass, because raising the state pension age, there was supposed to be an announcement on that on May the 5th.
Were you surprised, Kate Proctor, that the Labour Party has committed itself to keeping a triple lock on pensions?
No, not at all. It's hugely expensive, and it sounds like just the kind of thing that they think is a really, really good idea, and it's an absolute vote winner, and especially for those over 55, 60 onwards. It's hugely popular, but I think, as a lot of evidence has shown, it's financially unviable. So it's a real vote winner, so it's something that Jeremy Corbyn's going to put out there, but it's going to be a difficult one for them to try and see through.
Right. Just finally, PMQs on Wednesday, the last one before Parliament prorogues. What are you expecting, Fraser?
But Theresa May, she's in hugely good form right now. She seems to be relishing this election, and she'll be trying to handbag Jeremy Corbyn as much as she can. I think he might try to attack her from the right. Already we've had this rather effective Tory tax bombshell attack line from Labour. He might try another few of those. Strange to see him resorting to that, but he hasn't got that much ammunition to deploy.
Kate Proctor and Fraser Nelson, thank you both very much. Enjoy the election campaign. Now, on Friday's programme, my guest Laura Perrins from the Conservative Woman website claimed that the shadow Brexit secretary, Keir Starmer, sent his children to private school. Well, this is incorrect. Keir Starmer says his children go to a local state primary in Camden, which is non-selective. Laura Perrins has since issued an apology, and we're also happy to make that clarification. Now, with the election, every political party will be taking a long, hard look at their priorities for public spending. As they write their manifestos, they'll be trying to decide where to be generous and where to make savings. When it comes to a government's first duty, the defence of the realm, we spend what is the NATO target, around 2% of our national income. But the writer Andrew Sabisky argues that isn't enough and is challenging the parties to commit to trebling, yes, trebling the MOD's budget. Here's his soapbox.
This London Memorial, honouring the thousands of airmen who died flying Bomber Command in the Second World War, is a magnificent reminder of our glorious military past. But here in the present, decades of funding cuts have crippled our armed forces. Solution? It's very simple. Our heroes need a pay rise. But the problem's not just recruitment. We're building aircraft carriers, but without the escorts needed to protect them properly. The army has fewer than 200 main battle tanks left, and we've lost the capacity to build more. In Iraq and Afghanistan, our troops fought bravely, but lacked the resources to defeat the insurgencies they faced and had to be bailed out by the Americans twice. At the moment, we spend 2% of our national income on defence. But if we want to be a truly global power, then we need to pay for it. And that means increasing the military's budget. On our doorstep, a weak Europe faces the terrifying threat of a resurgent Russia that could conquer our allies, Estonia and Latvia, in just 60 hours. And our Ministry of Defence isn't equipped to deal with this challenge. We're far too reliant on the US, with the unstable President Trump at its helm. A dangerous and uncertain world calls for big, confident thinking. Now that there's an election, I'm challenging the parties to commit to trebling our defence expenditure from 2% to 6% of GDP. Protect our nation, save our military, and spend the six.
And Andrew Sabisky joins us now. Well done for timing it with the procession that was going on. Thank you. Why 6%? Why not 4%? Why not 5%?
Because we've lost so much capability over the last few decades, and particularly since 2010. The Defence Select Committee reported in 2016 that since 2010 we'd lost 20% of our conventional capabilities. I'm not saying we should spend 6% forever, but I think for maybe the next 5 years, a really big boost, some big heavy equipment buying, and then maybe taper down towards a long-term target of 4%.
All right, well, let's
That'd
get
be good
reaction to
central
that.
policy.
Nia, as the Shadows Fed spokesman, would you back that?
Well, we are absolutely committed to the 2% spending that NATO requires. That's the Labour Party commitment.
And that'll be in the manifesto?
That will definitely be in the manifesto.
Does Jeremy Corbyn support that?
Indeed he does, and has spoken about it at the dispatch box. And we have talks with John McDonnell about actually increasing the 2% spending. But what we will be doing, absolutely, is not fiddling the figures in the way that I have to say the Conservatives have done recently.
How have they fiddled the figures?
In the sense that they've been trying to include things like pensions as part of that 2%. We want it to be the 2% as we used to calculate back in 2010. But I think Andrew's highlighted the point that we've seen defence spending slashed since the 2010 defence review, and that's the problem that we've got now.
So would you like to... You indicated that you'd like to spend more than 2% than the NATO commitment. How much more would you like to spend?
Well, I've said that we are looking very carefully at what we would need to spend, and we would want to do a proper review to look at some of the gaps that Andrew is highlighting and to look at where we may need to put in more money.
All right, well, that may be music to your ears, although not enough, as you are saying. I mean, not even America spends that much on GDP, the 6% that you are talking about. So why should we?
Again, I'm not saying we should do it forever, and this is not a partisan issue. There's plenty of blame for the last Labour government as well as the Tories here. But because of the capabilities that we've lost and we urgently need to restore, such as the fact that we don't have the airborne capability to patrol our seas against submarines, it's just gone.
But Andrew, the brutal figures when you get down to it, we spend, what, about 45, 50 billion on defence now. That would put it up to 150 billion. It would be bigger than the NHS budget. You know, where does that extra £100 billion come from?
But are you comfortable with the defences as they are now, particularly in the way that Andrew has just outlined?
I'm comfortable that from the time of the last election, we increased the defence commitment to that 2% of GDP. We said the cuts were done, and we have an investment programme in machinery and the goods that people need, and it's therefore stable in company with partners, in company with NATO. To go to the sort of figures you're talking about, I just think is impractical, and we have to work with others for our defence capability.
It would mean massive cuts to other parts of public spending.
It would mean a few, but I think certain sacrifices may have to be made, particularly by the older generation who are currently recipients of extremely expensive pledges such as the triple lock, free NHS prescriptions, and so on and so forth.
In order to fund defences. But I mean, are you saying that we're in a world that's more dangerous than during the Cold War, for example?
Well, I wouldn't say it was necessarily less dangerous given the highly unpredictable and unstable leadership in Russia, North Korea, and of course the Middle East is just one giant powder keg.
Right, and you would agree with that. And you would agree, but you would agree with that. I mean, we are living in a dangerous world, whether it is as dangerous as it was in the Cold War, and that there were cuts to defences, serious cuts to defences. Nia has accused you of fiddling the figures.
I don't think we fiddled the figures at all. But what we said at the time of the last election was that those cuts had come to an end. We were restoring, we were going back to the 2%. We made that pledge for 2% of GDP, which people said, oh, the Tories probably won't do that. We've done that, so that means that more money is coming into the forces now. It's essential we keep up our defences and that we work with others. And I think you need a strong, stable economy to enable you to do that. I don't think you would get it by trying to put in as much as you're suggesting.
I think we should
by
also...
taking it off.
I'm afraid we've run out of time. It's almost the end of the programme. Thank you very much for coming in and doing your soapbox. Thank you to you two for being guests of the day. And, of course, you'll be going out on the campaign trail. From all of us here, goodbye.
We're live at the Crucible in Sheffield next on BBC Two. Who'll make the quarter-finals today in Snooker's World Championship?
As a reality TV star, Donald Trump may have been ignorable, but he is now unignorable. He comes to us 24/7, but what will his presidency mean for the world?
Trump's first 100 days, tonight at 9 on BBC One.
Okay, here we go.